This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. Things often do not go according to plan. If this had slipped anyone's mind recently, please refer to the House Republican Conference's plan for a Media Row event in the Capitol this week to help sell their so-dubbed One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is about as popular as dirty socks. But committee hearings, conflicting media events, and a rule vote that went down in dramatic, inflammatory fashion conspired against it. So the gathered scribes in HC5 of the Capitol had a lot of time on their hands. Some of the leadership faithful among the congressional cadres there came by to sell the bill. Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith, for instance. Other members sort of darted in and out, navigating the table staffed by OAN, Spectrum, The Gray, Notice, Rumble, Epoch Times Espanol, Daily Mail, Daily Caller, and Roll Call. But the Media Row was supposed to last from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Lunch was provided. There was a lot of lunch left over when I departed at 2:30, eager to see what was going on and why it was such a strange sort of event. And so I wanted to use this as an example of like the sort of rushed nature that we see Congress in. And Mary Ellen McIntire, one of our politics team staff writers, was also at this event. And Mel, I just think it's just a good example of like when you try to do too much in 1 week, things will go wrong.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I think this is the kind of thing that is like, the Republicans are trying to sell this bill that, polls are not showing it's as popular as I think a lot of them would like it to be. Democrats are really hammering them on a number of healthcare provisions, included in the bill, while Republicans are really trying to emphasize the extension of the 2017 tax cuts, boosting the child tax credit, a Trump promise, no tax on tips. So these provisions that they feel really strongly that they should be rewarded for. I'll caveat, I think I showed up to this Media Row, this latter half of it. And was hoping to talk to some members about, how do you sell this, particularly in tougher districts? And, I saw a couple of Battleground members there talking mostly with conservative media outlets or doing television hits. But there were also, a number of members from deep red districts. We spoke with Randy Weber, got to talk to him a little bit about Texas redistricting efforts, something he was a part of in the state legislature there. But yeah, I think that we were sort of hoping that votes were supposed to end around 2:30 or so, that there would be, a rush of members sort of making it to the end once they had made their way over to the Capitol, do everything in one swing kind of thing. But then a rule vote went down, as we have seen is more likely to happen in the last few years up on Capitol Hill than maybe it once was. And that sort of took the energy a little bit out of this Media Row. Like I said, I can't really speak to the first couple of hours of if it was more of a place to be at the beginning, but there wasn't necessarily, while I was there, a big rush of members. I'm not going to say nobody was there. There were certainly members who were stopping by, doing some television hits and whatnot. But
I also want to emphasize that I'm not making fun of this, and I know that like they're the staffers that we met there, obviously they came by, they were very nice. They were really trying to get as many members as possible to us, so that we can, source up and talk to them about this. And so, and I appreciate that kind of outreach to the media. I think that it's a welcome sign. Like so many times in Capitol Hill, you're trying to catch somebody and they're just like, they don't have a lot of time for you, or they're in a gaggle of other people, or, they're busy, they're rushed, they're going from one hearing to the next. And this was actually like, no, we want members to come and talk to people on an individual basis. And I really appreciated that. It just didn't work
right.
because of again, there was this sort of series of events that have led to this, right? One, the reconciliation process that resulted in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was rushed in itself. They didn't sell this to the public. The selling point that was that it was beautiful, and it was big. It was, they didn't really have a lot of messaging on it, and they didn't have a lot of public input to tell people this is the reason that we're doing stuff. It was really just like the president wants this, so we're going to do this. We're going to steamroll our own colleagues and Democrats and everybody else, and we're just going to get it signed into law. And they did. To their credit, they made that happen. Nothing is easy. But then they're in this mode of like, okay, now that it's on the books, we're finding more things out about it, and now we need to sell it. So they set this up, great for them. And then, they thought that they were going to sort of wrap up a lot of business. This is like they've only got this week and next before they're looking to leave for the August congressional recess. And so we did something that's becoming increasingly common, where they stuffed a bunch of bills into one rule to set the the debate on the floor, the rules for the debate on the floor, and big ticket items, a bunch of stuff on crypto, a bill funding the Pentagon, and conservatives in particular, the people from the House Freedom Caucus were like, you know what? I don't feel like having this. I don't feel that there was the bill that it was in question. It was about stablecoin. Apparently this was the crux of what was angering them. They're like, they had passed it, and then the Senate did their own version, sent that back and said and it was a take it or leave it. And they're like, well, we're going to leave it. We want more input on this. And it was just like, it seems like they just can't seem to settle down and do one thing at a time.
Even, to that point, there seemed to be some inner Republican caucus counter-programming going on. The Republican Study Committee, the largest caucus of Republicans in the House, was having their own media row, I think with new media, conservative outlets at the same time, which is fine, except, I think that, then your members are just torn in between two events. I think for some of them, there was probably an aspect of, well, this one is physically closer to where I am, so I'm going to go there to get my message out instead of trekking into the Capitol. So it is just kind of tough to, I do think that Republicans are really trying to get their message out on this bill and trying to sell this bill. Republicans that I've spoken to are like, no, this is our midterm message. Same as what both parties can agree on is that the midterms are going to be about this bill. Right. It's just the challenge of getting that message out and selling that message. And I think that, to your point, for Republicans, while you're going through it and you're fighting for every vote and for your rank and file members, you're really pushing to make sure that your provision in this massive bill gets in, it doesn't get changed too much. It's a little bit, you're more focused on the actual assembly of the measure than selling it to the public. Whereas Democrats have sort of had a head start in this messaging race. Whereas, for several months, they've been messaging on this bill is going to cut Medicaid. So they've kind of gotten a head start on that race in some ways.
Yeah, very much. Again, it's July, but it feels like we've been in this Congress for 5 years, with as much as the sort of hit the ground running aspect of it. But I think one of the things that is so I wish somebody would think hey, maybe there's a better way to do this. One of the reasons that it was rushed at the beginning was they didn't finish. They didn't hit their deadlines for funding the government last year when they had the chance to just sort of, put a bow
Clean
on
slate.
it.
Yep.
On the last Congress and the last administration. And they had to deal with a few things like the debt limit and so forth. But they first needed to just fund the government for the fiscal year that started in October.
Right.
and so that didn't happen until March. There was drama with that. Then there wasn't an agreement on what, how many bills, how many big, beautiful bills there would be. The Senate was talking about 2, the House wanted 1, there was sort of mixed messaging from the president about it until he decided it was going to be about 1 big, beautiful bill. And again, like you said, the lost in this is selling it to the public because there's become such an issue of procedure and deadlines that they set for themselves. I won't say artificial deadlines because all deadlines are artificial.
Sure. Yes. At some point you have to make a deadline or these things will just never come together.
Right. But they became kind of obsessed about getting something to him before the Independence Day recess, which they did. And then kind of lost in it is like the why of it. And, you look at polling and it's relatively popular with Republicans, no surprise. It's incredibly unpopular with Democrats. And then independents are meh on it. And that's usually where you win elections is with independents. And they, for all the bluster of, we're just going to do this and it's my way or the highway, kind of mentality from the White House, they're keenly attuned, I would guess, to independent voters and how this is going. And it's not. And, this is what we do, right? We're obsessed about like, well, they had a, competing event over here and so forth, but it's the little things, it's the logistics that make the big things possible. And it seems like the logistics are a little off. You mentioned that the Republican Study Committee had this alternative, event going on. The one that we went to, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act Media Row,
Yes.
that was arranged by the House Republican Conference. This comes from leadership. The Republican Study Committee is roughly 3/4 or so of the entire Republican conference. So you would think that somebody would say like, hey, maybe we should coordinate this message with leadership. And they didn't, or they did, or they said like, well, let's just make sure that we're covered all over the place. But I think also, another thing that made it weird was that the room that we were in the basement of the Capitol, HC5, that's usually where the majority meets. That's where the Republicans meet on Tuesdays. They didn't do that, because probably they were just like, hey, we got to set up for this thing. We got to put out the coffee and Diet Cokes and all that kind of stuff. So they had it over at the Capitol Hill Club where they go sometimes when they want a little more privacy. But that meant that all the members were over there.
Yeah.
Not in the building, and so it made it just seems like it just wasn't that well thought out.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, I'm like, oh, FEC reports were due yesterday. They could talk campaign fundraising. They could all announce their campaign transfers. So like, yes, in my mind, I'm like, sure, it makes sense that this would be the week to be at the Capitol Hill Club where they usually talk more politics. To your point, there was also probably the logistical thing of conference ends at 10. We want to start this media row at 11. That's not enough time to get the space set up. I mean, that was definitely one of the first times that I had been in HC5 in, my 10 years of covering the Capitol, sort of lost in all of that. But yeah. So yes, that does make sense. But yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of times it's just like the flow of a member's day of like, okay, where do I have to be? And then like setting up around that. And how it worked out was because they had conference offsite. No one had to be in the Capitol until votes. And then the vote took longer than expected. It was a little bit more dramatic than expected. So it was just like people's days were probably like, okay, I'm going to go to this at a certain time. And then it turned out that they couldn't. And then they had another obligation somewhere else.
Right.
Would probably be my guess.
Right. And another one of my favorite quotes from one of the staffers was, yeah, there were a couple of conflicts with committee hearings. And I was like, oh, wow, who would have thought that there would be committee hearings on a Tuesday morning during a work week? Except anyone who does any planning around the Capitol, anyone who has a staff a member knows that that's when the committees meet.
When the committees
and so
meet.
They're not particularly well attended. So a lot of people ditch them or they say their piece or they vote, like or whatever. But like Tuesday morning is a busy time.
It's a busy time in the Capitol.
Right. And I guess, where I'm going with this too is that like it's not up to me to tell, members of Congress how they should structure their day. But if the point of things is to get members in front of the media so they can talk about their legislative priorities or their political priorities, do that in a way that works for your members. I mean, we'll be there. We're there all the time, right? But like, if it just seems like there were a lot of good intentions, and because like it wasn't thought out in terms of what can go wrong or trying to do too much all at once, the wheels just kind of came off.
Yeah. I think to some extent this was probably a success for them. They certainly had members there talking to the media. Like if that was the stated goal, it was achieved. I think it's more of like, how successful in the grand scheme of things. Like, did you want kind of a steady flow over 4 hours of members coming in and out? That was not necessarily our experience.
Right.
But more credit, please, to all Hill staffers. Please put more events together where members come and talk to the press and you're not chasing after them and trying to gauge what door of the House chamber they're going to be exiting out of. I will advocate more of that every week, please.
Absolutely. I mean, some of it's a little bit more formal, like these days. But I mean, there were times in the last, well, this makes me sound so old. Couple decades where, members of Senate leadership used to take reporters onto the floor, and they would have like an off the record. Yeah, they would have an off the record, like, they would go through like what they were trying to accomplish that week and so forth. And that just seems like quaint now. Like, I mean, it's so quaint, like, because most senators are on a plane on Monday, rushing to get there for a 5 o'clock or 5:30 vote on Monday. And then as soon as they go in, some of them literally go in, vote, and then go off to the next fundraiser or whatever. And then, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is busy. And then Thursday night, they're out of there, and it's like, people, please chill. I think everybody would be better off.
There may be some weeks, are in their defense, probably a few too many reporters hanging around the Senate to bring everyone onto the Senate floor for an off the record. But in general, that is like, when someone told me that a couple of months ago that this used to happen, I was shocked, because certainly not since I've been covering the Hill.
Yeah. Do you want to stick around for the words of the week?
Let's do it.
All right. I swear this isn't an editorial comment, just because of the rule debacle on the floor in the House. But it did occur to me that there are, we could do a series of like things about rules. So I'm going to start this one off with open rule. An open rule is a special rule from the House Rules Committee that permits members to offer as many floor amendments as they wish, as long as the amendments are germane and do not violate other House rules. This is different from a closed rule, which we'll just save for another time. Anyway, that's the word. Those are the words of the week. Open rule. And a note to our listeners, I am actually taking a little bit of time off for the coming weeks. And so in my stead, I will have some guest hosts. Political theater will go on without me in the time that I am trying to nail together my garden beds and things like that in the time off that I have coming, and arranging my sock drawer. There's a second reference to socks for this podcast. But yes, we'll have some guest hosts, and it'll go on, and then we'll be in the recess, and before you know it, it'll be September. So I'll be back. In the meantime, thanks for listening, and have a great week.